on, please feel free to share that in the chat during this online rally. So today, people are gathering in at least 34 cities in 24 states, and they're doing that to stop a war with Russia over Ukraine. Actions have been happening throughout the week. They're going to be ongoing in the next few days as well. And this is a really strong beginning and what we need to be doing to stop this very dangerous escalation of war with Russia by the United States and some of it, fortunately not all of its Western allies, but with some of its Western allies, particularly like the United Kingdom. We are being lied into another war, another illegal and potentially devastating war. And this time it's between two major superpowers, two nuclear armed states. So in response to this urgent crisis, about a week ago, a dozen national and international organizations, anti-war organizations, got together and together crafted and put out this urgent call to action. So all of this has happened in a very short time frame, which is really awesome. And these 12 organizations are the sponsors of today's rally. We're going to hear from representatives from each of those organizations who are going to talk about what's going on, what they're doing, what we can do to stop the war with Russia. And so those organizations are the Answer Coalition, Black Alliance for Peace, CODEPINK, the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space, the International Action Center, Popular Resistance, Task Force on the Americas, United National Anti-War Coalition, U.S. Peace Council, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and World Beyond War. And then since then, almost 200 more organizations, most of them within the United States, but also international social movements have signed on to this call to action. And we have more than 800 people who've signed the petition, which you can find at popularresistance.org. It's in the slider at the top of the page, or just go, we'll put the link in the chat box, but it's just popularresistance.org/no war with Russia, all one word, no war with Russia. The opening to that call to action reads, "We must act now to stop the war with Russia over Ukraine, a war that would risk becoming a dangerous conflict between nuclear states. As people residing in the United States, we have a special responsibility to call upon the US government, and these are our demands, to stop the war with Russia." And we see it as, you know, a current, basically the actions that the US has taken are in effect a war, to stop the NATO expansion, to stop sending weapons to Ukraine and the European Union, to obey international law and the United Nations Charter, to resolve the current conflict within the United Nations Security Council, and to de-escalate the threat of nuclear war. On Monday, the United Nations Security Council met, and the US ambassador continued to promote the misinformation that paints Russia as the aggressor and the violator of law. The Russian ambassador confronted the United States over its lies in that meeting and said, and I quote, "Our Western colleagues say that de-escalation is needed, but they are the first to build up tension, enhance rhetoric, and escalate the situation. Talks about an imminent war are provocative per se. It might seem you call for it, want it, and wait for it to come, as if you wanted your allegations to come true. And indeed, it does seem that the United States wants a war with Russia. This is consistent with our current national security strategy of great power conflict. So we need actions, not words, to make our demands a reality. We have a lot of work to do to mobilize opposition within the United States, especially under a democratic administration after years of its demonization of Russia. So I thank you for being here today. I hope you find today's rally informative and inspiring. Let's build on this strong and unified base that we have to stop war with Russia and move the United States from an economy based on a military industrial security state complex that requires endless conflict to one that puts the needs of people and planet first. So I'm excited to be here with all of you today and with all of our fantastic speakers. I'm going to begin with Alice Loazia. She's the Vice President of the Task Force on the Americas. She's a longtime activist who lived in Colombia and has strong ties to the social movements there. Thank you so much for joining us today. And you can, there you go.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. Good morning from the Bay Area, actually. I guess everybody would wonder why one would speak about Colombia in relation to NATO or in relation to the United States threat on war on Russia. And it's very clear that Colombia has an important role. It's the only country in Latin America to be in NATO. It has relations with NATO since 2013, but they were solidified and formalized in 2018. And the United States needs Colombia. It's in a very strategic place at the top of South America, and not only serves as a NATO ally, but as an ally to the US and the war efforts of the US and the control of the US of the South America and to the Caribbean region. Colombia offers some really interesting things for NATO. They had, due to the militarization of Colombia by the United States since 2000 with Plan Colombia and an extremely well-trained surveillance and military police and paramilitary forces from Colombia. Colombia offers a lot of militarism and a lot of work that they can do covertly as well as overtly for the United States in wars like the one that's being threatened now. One of the things that they do is they offer military help, military aid, but they also offer, one of the big things that Colombia offers is the covert actions and the mercenaries and the paramilitary actions that they do for the United States. And they do this pretending the United States pretending not to know anything about it, of course, because it's covert. And they use Colombia to intervene in many countries in the Middle East. They've trained people in the Middle East. They've been very linked with the Israeli government for their own training. They do a lot of work in Central America, training people in Central America. And a lot of the training that the Colombians do is training other countries how to use paramilitary actions and to use human rights abuse without being signaled that the US is doing this. So this is one of the things that Colombia does for the United States in these kinds of wars and will continue doing. The conditions in Colombia, of course, what does the Colombia get out of this? Colombia gets quite a bit. They get their pockets full of money. They get free military and all kinds of, the ruling class gets all kinds of benefits from this. And so they promise to do this, and they also get a lot of help in repressing the Colombian social movements that are quite large and have been very large this past year. So Colombia is an important role in supporting the US in this war against Russia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to mention, I want to get that up in the beginning so folks know about it. If you go to popularresistance.org/no-war-with-Russia, you'll see the different actions. You'll also find information about webinars that are coming up. And one important one is tomorrow, being hosted by United National Anti-War Coalition. And this webinar features activists from the United States as well as from Ukraine and Russia. So very important that we hear from folks that are there. So thank you, UNAC, for organizing that. I now want to turn to David Swanson, who is in Washington, D.C. presently, close to the White House. He is the co-founder, executive director, and a board member of World Beyond War. Thank you for getting up there early, David, so you could join us this morning.
Thank you, Margaret. Terrific job on this. The people inside the White House, across the street from me here, sometimes believe they can sell us what we don't want to buy. They've got a recipe for mixing up irresistible poisons. They do polling, they test out phrases on focus groups, they turn entire foreign governments into a single person, and that person into Adolf Hitler. They say defense, democracy, and appeasement a lot. They restage group photos, bravely screening the murders of distant enemies, but sometimes they miscalculate. Sometimes it's the cumulative result of decades of spin from numerous administrations, when even a good corporate reporter who wants to believe everything just can't stomach any longer the recycled lies that he's fallen for too many times before. And so they tell us that Russia's going to start a war in Nazi fashion with a false flag excuse, albeit against a US-backed coup government with Nazi elements. And they tell us Russia did this 8 years ago and that there was no coup. And everyone accepts that, of course. I mean, who can remember anything from 8 years ago? We merely have recordings of them plotting the coup and photos of them handing out pastries to the protesters. Have they ever once brought us pastries? But they seem to have misjudged their own approved journalists in claiming that Russia is about to act, because one of them, like Oliver Twist in The Orphanage, humbly asking for a bit more food, eventually spoke up and said, "Sir, could we have just the slightest bit of evidence for your claims, please?" And the very concept of evidence seemed incomprehensible to them. And that seemed odd, even to people who believe Trump is Putin's slave and NATO is a charitable philanthropy. What if they're wrong about more than the ability to sail through without evidence? What if people are not impressed by photos of armchair killers watching families blown up? What if they're wrong, not only about the US public wanting war with Russia? They know the US public does not want war with Russia, at least not a war in which any people deemed to matter, that is, US people, die. But what if they're also wrong that we want or will tolerate the reckless macho blustering and threatening that risks a war that risks nuclear war, a nuclear war that risks ending all life on Earth? What if they only consulted the same geniuses who told them to value the filibuster and bipartisan harmony over the lives of struggling people? What if we agree with them on the need to stand up strong and stop appeasing evil forces, but understand the evil forces that most need resistance not to be based in Moscow, but rather to be running Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, The Washington Post, and toiling away in the US government, dealing weapons around the globe, pushing for more and more bases and missiles, and insisting on the Eurasian pivot away from small-time terrorists to demonizable governments that are better for business. We need a Department for Defense against the warmongers. In its absence, we will have to do the job ourselves. Peace.
Thank you so much, David. And now I want to turn to Sarah Flounder. Sarah's in New York, where there will also be a large rally today. And Sarah is the co-director of the International Action Center, an organization that opposes US militarism, corporate globalization, racism, and war. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being able to join us today.
Well, thank you, Margaret. And I literally am on my way out the door for the demonstration that we're planning in New York today at Times Square, the Red Steps. But I'm glad you opened by talking about actions in 34 cities and 200 organizations and 800 other signers and all of that, because it is always a people's movement that makes the difference, and having a unified view that this is a United States government provocation, refusing to go along with the lies, saying no war with Russia in a united way is so important, because we are combating a really ruthless media in a really fabricated crisis and risking wider war. I mean, they just barely were thrown out of Afghanistan after 20 years of complete ruin and waste and destruction, and have left behind intentionally starvation and sanctions there. And they're on to the next war. And it's full of lies. You think of the endless number of maps saying why Russia has 100,000 troops threatening to invade Ukraine. Every one of those troops are within Russia. What faces them in NATO? NATO is today a US commanded military force of 3.5 million soldiers, literally think about it, operating in constant war games, military operations, naval actions from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea to the Mediterranean, nonstop, and bringing in more and more equipment. And all the promises not to expand NATO, they've more than doubled the size right to the borders of Russia. So we shouldn't forget who is the aggressor, who has violated the agreements and who is pushing for wider war. And we need to look at the 800 US military bases. Russia does have one military base in Syria. That's about it. So just looking at the comparisons, looking at the staged provocation, extremely dangerous, extremely dangerous. And I want to just take a second to say, yesterday, here's the opening of the Olympic Games in Beijing. And what's the US response? A really shoddy publicity stunt in Syria, claiming that they're again going after terrorist forces. Six children die. But it's this endless publicity stunts of militarism. In closing, I also want to say that we can't say our government. We have to make demands on this government. We have a responsibility to make demands on this government. But the US government today is a government of corporate billionaire power. The military and media corporations are really merged. And both Republicans and Democrats are imperialist parties of war. They have a different social base, that's true. But when it comes to war, they have the same interests. And they unanimously vote again and again for the military budgets, for the bases, for the sanctions on a third of the world population. This is an aggressive, combined Republican and Democrat that stands for war. And it's what we're up against. And it's why we need the greatest unity without illusions, and a strong people's force coming from below. So thank you for hosting today. And we're going to hear a lot more facts on this webinar tomorrow, but all of the groups who have taken part in putting this out and listing each other's actions and all the actions they know about, that's what we need and need even more of. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and hope you have a great rally out there today. There was a question I just want to highlight in the chat about how we can get the media to cover this properly, and Ajamu Baraka put some good comments in there. But it's important that we, if it's an online media outlet, that you make comments, that you send in letters to the editor to your media, that you try to get op-eds in your media, and also remember the independent media that is covering this issue in an honest way, and amplify that, share that out. We have studies that show that when independent media work with a unified message, that actually reaches people, it makes a difference, it changes the national conversation. So let's do all that we can to push the true narrative out there and stop the lies that are being told right now. And now I want to turn to Ann Wright. And Ann is coming to us from early in the morning in Hawaii, and she is a retired U.S. Army colonel and former U.S. diplomat who resigned from the U.S. government in opposition to Bush's war on Iraq veterans on Iraq. She's part of Veterans for Peace and CODEPINK Women for Peace, and as I said, she's in Honolulu. Thank you, Ann.
Hey, Margaret, and aloha to everyone. Good morning. It's a little after 7 in the morning here. We actually had a big rally in Honolulu yesterday, and you see one of the signs that we had from it right up here. And I think it's, we did a good job on it, saying, you idiots, you idiot politicians, what the hell are you doing again, trying to get us into another friggin' war? What in the world are you doing? I mean, I'm sitting out here and halfway across the Pacific at the headquarters of a command, a military command. We're talking really about Russia and NATO and the US and Russia, but the military command here in Honolulu is the Indo-Pacific Command. And guess what they've done? They have invited NATO forces to come into the Western Pacific with the freedom of navigation, things that are going on in China's front yard. So, around the world, the US and its ally, NATO, is causing big trouble everywhere. And truly, it is up to us as citizens to keep after our government and tell them we do not want this. I mean, Joe Biden is going after the Ukraine and Russia from 2014 and the U.S. coup in Ukraine that just resulted in the annexation by Russia at the request of the people in Crimea. But boy, that has really caused great tension for the last 8 years. And the Biden administration and all of its hangovers or leftovers from the Obama administration, including the evil Victoria Nuland, one of the coup makers in Ukraine, and Jake Sullivan, and Secretary of State, and I would say of Defense also, Anthony Blinken. I mean, all of them are warmongers, and we must push back hard. And there's so many places to push back. I mean, if you just look at all of the places. So I went into my little library here, and what else are we worried about? Here we are, no war with Iran. How old is this thing? And I'll just mention, this is, let's see, we've got Move On right here. And as Medea Benjamin wrote, we've got to get the progressive element of the Democratic Party to challenge the warmonger Democrats, because they and the Republicans are saying, fine, let's just go to war over Russia. Let's just put all sorts of people into Poland, into Ukraine. Let's put multiple ships out in the Western Pacific. I mean, these guys and gals are just plain warmongers. And so here we go with another sign. This was another one, no war on Russia. And I would just say, to add to it, let's just do no war on anyone. With that, aloha, and write your newspapers, write your congressmen and women, and demand that they stop this warmongering, and let's flood the White House with its little contact thing that we'll put in here. Flood them with all sorts of emails. No war, no more on anyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you for your tireless activism and truth-telling. So critical. Now I'm excited to turn to Rafiki Morris, and Rafiki is an organizer and on the committee of the Black Alliance for Peace. You can find his writing at Hood Communist. Thank you, Rafiki.
Well, thank you very much for having us, and we're overwhelmed and about a response so far to this call to stop the war against Russia. The Black Alliance for Peace would like to make a few quick statements. First of all, we think it's important to put a human face on war. We are told about war as if it's something that is taking place somewhere else, that involves somebody else, and that is about meeting US natural interests. But the truth is that war is about people dying, families being destroyed. It's about cultures being ravished. It's about children being left homeless and being killed and murdered. It's about creating an environment where bombs and bullets are active elements of your atmosphere. And we think that it's really important that people understand what is in fact taking place and who are these players. They would have us think that this is some conflict between Biden and Putin, but it is really a conflict between the US and the world. It's the United States government that is fostering wars all over the world, and they're using, as they have in the past, their lapdogs and attack dogs called NATO. We talk about NATO as if it is some congenial grouping of nations looking out for the best interests of folks in the North Atlantic. but NATO is a mercenary army. NATO is a US mercenary army that is paid by the US to do their bidding all over the world. Today, it is the Ukraine. Yesterday, it was Libya. And tomorrow, who knows who it will be. We know this because we have witnessed their continued attacks on humanity. And we see it happening over and over again. They manufacture an excuse to kill other people. Manufacture it, just make it up. And then they use the media to justify these fantasies that they create. The US providing intelligence to NATO is crazy. It's just insane. This is the same people who provided us with the intelligence that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. This is the same people who provided the intelligence that Muammar Gaddafi was killing his own people. And this intelligence, this red flag that they waved to justify pursuing their what they call their national interests, is something that humanity has got to come to grips with and understand that this is not about protecting the people of the Ukraine. We have a lot of problems with this situation. We remember the coup in the Ukraine. We remember the US financing of this illegal regime. And now they're coming to use their relationship with an illegal regime that they put in power to justify the whole world being embroiled in what could potentially be a disastrous war that could end humanity. So for us, the other thing that is very important is that Black people need to understand that this is about the same people who are responsible for our suffering all over the world. The same people who put these bombs, are threatening bombs in Ukraine, are today firing rockets all over Africa through AFRICOM. They're fostering war in the Middle East through CENTCOM, and they even have a SpaceCom. So they have militarizing space in order to maintain their world domination. So when we come to these rallies, we think it's important that we explain to people who are the forces at work, what are they trying to achieve, and who's going to benefit from it. And I think some of the previous speakers have pointed to the Lockheed Martins and the international media and their role in fostering this war. And we think it is only the people who are organized who can stop this war. So our slogan is organize, organize, organize. Don't just explain what's happening in Russia to your colleagues and friends. Explain it to your mother. Explain it to your grandchildren. Explain it to the people you work with day in and day out. These are the ones who need to understand that if they don't get involved, we will be in another war. In fact, we need to understand that the wars never stopped. Yes, they left Afghanistan, but we have coups d'etats all over West Africa today. We have war still raging in the Middle East. And now we're going to start a war in Europe. The United States government is the only folks that are responsible for what's happening in the Ukraine. And the US government now, they just passed over $750 billion military budget. That's US tax money. And these are US people here listening to our rally today. Your money is paying for this war. And we think it's time for people to stand up. We think it's time for people to organize. We think it's time for people to recognize that the interests of the people of America and the interests of the US government are two entirely different things. And if we do not organize to defend our interests will not be defended. Thank you very much. And we're once again glad to be here and participate in this historic gathering of peace organizations. We need to be together like this all the time so that we can continue to fight this ongoing threat against human life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafiki, and Black Alliance for Peace. No compromise, no retreat. I want to thank Carl for sharing the Malcolm X quote in the chat. It's so appropriate right now that if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppression. So we have to keep telling the truth and getting out there. Next, I want to invite Leela Anand. Leela is representing the Answer Coalition, and she's a journalist who writes with Liberation News. Thank you so much, Leela, for being with us today.
Hello, everybody. My name is Leela Anand, and I'm the Southern Regional Coordinator with the Answer Coalition. I think that our activity today and the other actions that are taking place around the country, including the protests in front of the White House, are of the greatest urgency. It's imperative that the people of this country go into the streets. We must sound the alarm. We must let our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, our families, our fellow students become fully aware that the government that speaks in our name, the government that spends our tax dollars, is engaged in actions in Ukraine and at the Russian border that are not only dangerous and not only provocative, but they're setting the stage for a possible war that could envelop an entire region and indeed the entire world. The United States government spends more than 10 times what Russia spends each year on its military. The United States spends almost $800 billion a year, and that's just the Department of Defense spending. When you look at the Department of Energy and other agencies, the real number of US military spending is somewhere in the neighborhood of $1 trillion. Remember, that's every single year. And the countries that constitute NATO, a US-led military alliance, together spend $1.7 trillion per year on death and destruction. That's $1.7 trillion for military expenditures. The United States and NATO countries have pushed the NATO military alliance steadily closer to Russia and have incorporated former Soviet republics and other key Soviet and Russian allies in Eastern and Central Europe into its military alliance. Now they're putting troops and advanced weapons, and soon these weapons will include advanced intermediate range missiles that directly threaten Russia. The Russian government has made it clear that these are red lines for Russia. They're putting their foot down. They're telling the United States and NATO, we will never allow you to place weapons, including missiles with a flight time of 2 or 3 or 5 minutes to their targets in Ukraine or at our border. When the Russians made it explicitly clear that this was unacceptable and amassed Russian soldiers inside of Russia, NATO and the United States accused Russia of being the provocateurs and the perpetrators of aggression. One might only consider for a moment what the United States' reaction would be if Russia placed advanced weapons and missiles at the US-Mexican border or the US-Canadian border. Russian missiles with a flight time of 5 minutes to hit Chicago or New York or Washington, D.C. Asking the question answers it. The US would be prepared to engage in all-out war against Russia. In fact, this is precisely what happened in 1962 when the Soviets placed intermediate-range tactical weapons in Cuba. It was only because the Soviets ultimately decided to withdraw those missiles that the world narrowly averted a thermonuclear war that could well have extinguished life on the planet as we know it. The US anti-war movement must reject the demonization of Russia because demonization is nothing other than a public relations tool designed to generate public support for a new war. Let's never forget that it was precisely this tool of demonization that was used in preparation for the catastrophic invasion of Iraq. Finally, the people of this country need decent paying jobs affordable housing, affordable, and I should say free healthcare services. They need education, and it should be free for working class young people. The people of this country, in fact, need the government to change course. We need money for jobs, education, housing, healthcare, not for another catastrophic war. But the reality is that this government will only listen to the dictates of the generals and the military industrial complex and capitalist corporations that profit from war, unless we build a massive movement at the grassroots that changes the political climate and creates sufficient pressure that can lead to an end to this current crisis and to end once and for all the danger posed by a government that is addicted to endless war. So thank you. And we join with all of you in building this activity and in all of the other manifestations of protest and opposition in the coming days and weeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leela Anand, and thank you for that powerful presentation. As we should be aware, there was an accounting firm that spent the last year, 1,400 accountants trying to audit the Pentagon. Not only could they not account for all of the money and the goods or the things that the Pentagon owns. Sorry, I'm fumbling this morning, but this afternoon, but they couldn't figure out what an operating budget would be for the Pentagon. They couldn't figure out how much the Pentagon actually needs to do what it's doing. Yet every year Congress gives more than it's even asked for, more money to the Pentagon, and it's a bipartisan, almost unanimous budget that's being given to the Pentagon. Well, we're suffering through the climate crisis and the pandemic with so many needs, student debt, as Leela pointed out. So thank you for that. I now want to turn to Henry Lohendorf. Henry is the chair of the Greater New Haven Peace Council, and he's representing the U.S. Peace Council today. Thank you, Henry.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you all of the speakers so far. Wonderful presentations. The people want peace. We want relief from COVID. We want healthy food, clean water, affordable housing. We want debt-free education, decent jobs at livable wages, and we want all the rights guaranteed by the United Nations. The one thing we don't want is more war. No war on Russia, no war on Ukraine, no war on China, no wars in Africa and Latin America. The peace movement must be visible. 20 years of war in Afghanistan, what did it get us? Death of Afghans, death of Americans, millions wounded, refugees, vast destruction, corrupt government. Democracy? No. And now starvation, made in the USA. The other wars, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and so many others. Same destruction, more death. An unimaginable fortune, $21 trillion squandered by the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. Madness. All that the people wanted and needed, healthcare, education, housing, an end to inequality and racism could have been ours, squandered. Who benefits from war? The makers of weapons, the death merchants. Even the threat of war boosts their profits. The biggest death contractors are Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, General Dynamics, Boeing, Northrop Grumman. The CEO of Raytheon is salivating. These guys are big and powerful. The only way we stop them is united action by a united peace movement and all the social justice movements. United action, street heat. Biden is provoking war in far-off Ukraine against far-off Russia to promote the expansion of a vicious military alliance, NATO, that few understand. The corporate media, New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox, etc., regurgitate Washington's propaganda, never doubting. We doubt. We say no to NATO expansion. We say no to NATO, no military alliances. Unite for peace. As the 20th century waned, the worst warmongers gathered to create a plan for the new American century, a plan for the future of imperialism. They called the United States to build full spectrum dominance. It demanded control over every aspect of our lives, military, economic, political, diplomatic, cultural. Controlled by whom? By big corporations, by the death merchants, by the money speculators, by imperialism. Dominance that could not be challenged by any other country or any other people no matter where they were. But the people united can't be defeated. The death merchants promote wars and Biden is their salesman, just as his predecessors sold war, just as most of Congress is selling and buying war. They promote the giant oil companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, Chevron. To save the planet from war and overheating the peace movement, all the social justice movements must unite. George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden, war presidents. The wars wrecked the invaded countries. The wars wrecked the people of the US. In 2014, President Obama understood that China's economy was quickly growing to challenge full spectrum dominance, while the US was squandering treasure in the Middle East. He proclaimed the US had to pivot to Asia to contain China's rise. His administration engineered a violent coup in Ukraine to contain Russia's rise. So again, we now confront more wars to subvert China and Russia, with our demands for the real peace dividend, a healthy global community, a healthy planet. No to wars for full spectrum dominance. Unite for peace. Unite that the world's resources stop bleeding us and feeding the billionaires and oligarchs. Unite for our humanity and our billions of brothers and sisters on this earth, our only home. Thank you.
Henry, thank you for those powerful words. And yes, that unity is so important. And that's why it's very exciting to see the unity that's growing in the United States, the 12 national and international organizations that came together quickly to issue the call to action, the hundreds of organizations that have signed on since then. This is all a really powerful start to building that important movement. So we're about halfway through the rally, and no rally is complete without some music. So I'm excited to invite Ben Grosscup. Ben is an activist folk singer. The song he's playing was born on the streets in DC during the No to NATO mobilization to protest the NATO meeting in the spring of 2019. A bunch of us were there for that, Ben, and enjoyed singing this song. So thank you for putting this together. And I know you're going to introduce it and then let me know when you're ready for me to start.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Yes, thank you, Margaret, for organizing today's virtual rally. And of course, as you said, what would a rally be without music? And as she mentioned, this did emerge from street actions. I do believe that songs, ideally, they emerge out of the movement. And this is a song that did that as we were mobilizing in the spring of 2019 to oppose NATO at the meetings that were taking place in Washington, D.C. And many of the people on this webinar were actually key organizers in those actions. This song borrows a melody from the African American spiritual Joshua the Battle of Jericho. And peace activists have used this melody before. In the 1970s, singers in the anti-nuke movement created a song that said, "We say the nukes have got to go." More recently, Charlie King sang, "We say the drones have got to go." This song is, "We say NATO's got to go." Today, we understand that NATO is a key threat to world peace. And as a peace movement, we must confront that threat. During the song, I'm going to be posting a link to the YouTube link to this video, and you'll be able to share that to help spread the anti-war message through song. Thank you, Margaret, for sharing it now. From Kosovo to Afghanistan to the fractured Libyan shore, the bureaucrats of NATO feed the hungry gods of war. They say that we're in danger, that's why we need more arms. But the threat of climate chaos doesn't seem to raise alarm. We say NATO's got to go, got to go, got to go. We say NATO's got to go so the people can live in peace. From the USA to Poland, from Ukraine to Brazil, NATO sells the weapons and the people pay the bill. We can't afford good housing or the right to good health care. We can't afford clean water, 'cause the military left us bare. We say NATO's got to go, got to go, got to go. We say NATO's got to go so the people can live in peace. NATO rules by violence, by bribes and threats and fear. But there's cracks in the foundation, and NATO's end is near. Remember what happened at Jericho? The trumpets began to sound. Joshua commanded the people to shout, and the walls came tumbling down. We say NATO's got to go, got to go, got to go. We say NATO's got to go so the people can live in peace. We say NATO's got to go, got to go, got to go. We say NATO's got to go so the people can live in peace.
Thank you for that, Ben. Excellent song. And I think, we should all share that out. As Ben said, it's a great way to reach people with the message. There's a lot of confusion about NATO, and it really does. It's got to go. So next, I want to bring on our next speaker, who's Bruce Grosscup. I'm sorry, Bruce Gagnon. I'm combining you two. And Bruce brings a great perspective. He coordinates the global network against weapons and nuclear power in space. But since 2016, he's traveled several times to Russia, Crimea, Odessa, and the Donbass region of Ukraine. And I know folks are asking about the Nazis there, and I know that Bruce can talk about that. So take it away, Bruce. Thank you.
Thanks to all. What a great turnout and great speeches by everybody. I went to Odessa in 2016. You should know in 2014, the people of Eastern Ukraine, after the coup, the new government that US installed announced that the speaking of Russian in Ukraine would be illegal. So the people of Eastern Ukraine, predominantly Russian-speaking, Russian ethnic Ukrainian citizens, began collecting referendum signatures and having peaceful marches, saying they wanted a federated Ukraine where they could make decisions about what language and who their local elected officials would be, rather than having this new Nazi-installed government in Kiev make those decisions for them. And so at the Trades Union Hall in Odessa in 2014, there's a park there, people, a lot of traffic, people walking through, people were collecting signatures, and a huge number of Nazis were brought in on a train, and they attacked this place. People ran inside the Trades Union Hall to look for safety, and the Nazis began throwing Molotov cocktails. Soon there was fire. People came to the windows because the smoke inside was killing them. And there's videos everywhere about this. Guys outside shooting at them. Some people jumped from the building, and when they hit the ground, they were beaten by Nazis with baseball bats and rods. Nobody was ever found guilty. The only people that ever went to jail were people that were inside the trades hall that somehow escaped with their life. In 2016, myself and a few other Americans went there at the request of the mothers of the victims of that massacre. And as we were moving to the site, the Azov battalion was throwing rocks at the bus we were in. And then when we got there, the Azov battalion, the Nazis, blocked off the entrance to the Trades Union Hall. We couldn't go in. So I've seen these guys. I've been near them, and they're for real. They're bad news, and that's who the US is supporting. I want to say that US envisions NATO as a global alliance to replace the UN, Because of the UN Security Council, Russia, China, other countries can block the US and NATO when they now come in there asking for support for regime change and invasions of other places. And so that's not working out for Washington, London, and Brussels. So they're envisioning a global NATO alliance that they can then say, look, we have this legitimate international organization. So this is really what they're up to. I want to remind you that in Romania and Poland, the US has installed 2 missile launch bases that can fire first strike attack, Tomahawk cruise missiles that are nuclear capable that would reach Moscow and, more importantly, command control centers inside of Russia, their military bases, et cetera, et cetera. So this is indeed a Cuban Missile Crisis in reverse. So when Putin complains about this, when Moscow complains about this, it's a legitimate complaint. As you all know, SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, annually looks at military spending. It was earlier said the US spends about 1.2 trillion a year. Russia spends $65 billion. Now, we're told by the media, by Washington, that Putin wants to recreate the former Soviet Union. He wants to take back all of Eastern Europe. Well, can he do that with $65 billion military appropriation? And when you add NATO countries' military spending to the US total, it's well over 60% of the global total. So just one more lie. And finally, it was mentioned that NATO is creating a space command. That's indeed true. And what they're doing is they bring in new NATO members and partners around the world. They require them to replace all of their military equipment with equipment that is called interoperable. That means it fits into the US warfighting technology system, which gives the US control of the tip of the spear, because the US is the only country within NATO that has this massive international system of downlink stations that communicate with the satellites in real time, split-second time, relay signals, surveillance, targeting, the whole works. So the US then is using NATO to create this, in their mind, undefeatable space technology system that can control the Earth below on behalf of corporate globalization, corporate capitalism, and also control the pathway on and off the Earth, as countries now are talking about going out and mining the sky for precious resources and minerals, which would violate the Outer Space Treaty and the Moon Treaty. So we're in a difficult period. I'm really heartened to see everybody on this call today. We're going out on the street today at 3 o'clock here in the mid-coast of Maine. Keep going, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bruce, and thank you for all that you do. I now want to turn to Susan Schnall. She's the current president of Veterans for Peace. And like others on this rally, Susan is a longtime anti-war activist. She is a nurse who was court-martialed for her anti-war activism during the Vietnam War. So thank you so much for joining us today, Susan.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you for inviting Veterans for Peace. And again, a reminder to all of us that we veterans have been to war, we've seen death and destruction, and we come out ever more strongly today to say the United States should stop its march towards war in the Ukraine and with Russia. We remember the beginning of World War I, the mobilization of armies joined by dozens of agreements between nations that led to over 40 million civilian and military deaths. Today, we have NATO that was formed to ensure that any attack against one ally is going to be an attack against all. And so we have, once again, a march towards war. And we in the United States are the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. We Americans leave our trail of destruction in over 150 countries across the world. Our corporate greed, our economic imperialism, the militarism of the United States economy knows no bounds. I know that I'm speaking to all of you who will agree that we need to wake up the people of this country. We are at war in this country, on this land. We are killing our children. We have become the monster in the world that produces more armaments, as we just heard from Bruce Gagnon, more battleships, more drones that annihilate whole communities with the push of a button. We destroy our young. We kill school children with impunity. We poison our water and food supply. We give the wealthy everything, great economic wealth and political power, so they can grab more opportunities for power and money. While we starve the poor so that we can go to war, we denigrate them with substandard housing, substandard education, lack of decent job opportunities, and then offer a way out by joining the military. So we may no longer have a countrywide draft, but we do have an economic draft. And that is very relevant to those of us in Veterans for Peace. We arm the police departments with military weapons that destroy and kill. There is no trial necessary for the poor and disadvantaged. We need to put the needs of people and the needs of the planet first. I'd like to also mention a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, who speaks about veterans as the light of the tip of the candle, illuminating the way for the whole nation. If veterans can achieve awareness, transformation, understanding, and peace, they can share with the rest of society the realities of war. And they can teach us how to make peace with ourselves and with each other, so that we no longer use violence to resolve conflicts. So I would say again, as an organization of veterans who have been to war, participated in it, now come home to say it is time to stop. We need to stop the war machine, and we need to stop the United States government and military from ever encroaching on war with Russia, with the Ukraine, with the rest of the world. We have over 150 military bases throughout the world. And we always ask, so what would happen if there were other countries having military bases in the United States? What would we do? We have a responsibility, because we know, to stop our military from encroaching on other nations. We need to bring the resources back to this country to take care of people who have needs in this country. We are Veterans for Peace. As I said, we have been to war, we have participated in it, we have seen its toll of death and destruction on people all over the world. We have a responsibility to bring our troops home. We have a responsibility to restrain the nuclear crisis. We have a responsibility to the people of the world. And we say, as Veterans for Peace, no more war. United States, stop mobilizing for the war with Russia. And it is time that we recognize the needs of people in this country, and we move towards taking care of the social needs of our people here, and that we look to peace and no more violence. So thank you on behalf of Veterans for Peace.
Thank you so much, Susan. And so powerful to see our veterans speaking out against the wars. It's just such a powerful message. For people who are asking about a recording, this rally is being recorded. It's also being live streamed at the Popular Resistance Facebook page, which is facebook.com/popularresistanceorg. And it will be posted later on the Popular Resistance YouTube channel as well. And I'm going to, the webinar function that I have doesn't allow me to save the chat. I'll find out if it's possible to do that. And if so, I can put that in a shared document. I know folks are asking about that as well. I now want to turn to Joe Lombardo. Joe is the coordinator of the United National Anti-War Coalition. Thank you for taking time to join us, Joe.
Hello, everybody. It's great to be here. It was really encouraging to me when a number of peace organizations got together just a week or so ago to put together this common statement that we all signed on to against a war with Russia, pointing the finger where it belonged at the United States, and then within a week have put together demonstrations in dozens of cities around the country, leading up to today, specifically on today, and a few that will happen in the days to come. I think this is a very important achievement on our part. You know, the hypocrisy of the United States and the lies are just so thick that even the media is having a difficult time. This docile American media, which is just reports what the State Department says, as if it is the news, is having a hard time to even accept it. First of all, Russia is the aggressor, because Russia has troops massed in its own country, on its own border. If you listen to the news media, they always say it's on the Ukrainian border. They don't say it's in Russian territory and on the Russian border. But it is the United States that has military all over the world in about 172 countries, about 20 times the number of foreign military bases as all other countries in the world combined. And in the past decades, it has invaded and occupied one country after the next. And yet it is Russia that is the aggressor. They say there's about 100,000 troops in Russia on the Russian side of the border. But they don't tell you that there's about 150,000 Ukrainian troops with US quote unquote advisors with modern US weapons that have just been upped the amount of weapons to the Ukrainians on the border with, on and in the border with Donbass and around the Russian border. They don't tell you that. They don't say that there are about 300,000 US troops in Europe. They don't say that we have held military maneuvers right on the border with Russia. And that's not aggressive, that's defensive. That we have missiles right on the border with Russia that can hit Moscow in a short period of time. That's defensive, that's not aggressive. So why does Russia have some troops on its side of the border? Well, you know, Ukraine has the largest border of any European country with Russia. The United States made a pledge to Russia when the Soviet Union was collapsing. It said it would never move west of Germany with NATO into the so-called Warsaw Pact countries, which were allies of the Soviet Union, or into the former Soviet states. It is now in 14 of them. And that's why it can have these maneuvers and missiles and troops right on the border. It is the US that is aggressive. And then when you look at what is going on in Ukraine, some of the things that Bruce talked about, I have also been in Ukraine and in Russia a few times in recent years. I was there last in 2019. I went to the same rally that Bruce Gagnon had went to before me, where we were asked to come in by the anti-Maidan people in Odessa to be witnesses to a memorial that they were doing for the people that were killed by Nazis in 2014. The reason they wanted international witnesses is because they are always attacked by these fascists. Well, thousands and thousands of Odessans came to this memorial and marched through it. And the Nazis did organize throughout the country, sent in buses and sent in trains people. And they held one of these torchlight marches through the town, chanting, "Hang the Russians from the trees." The Russians, who lost more than 20 million people, the Soviets, during World War II fighting the Nazis, now they have US-supported Nazis on their border. Is there not a reason that they have something to worry about, and that they should have forces when they start seeing masses of Ukrainian forces, which include outwardly fascist groups like the Azov battalion there? You know, the hammer and sickle is banned in Ukraine. But as I was there, especially in Kiev, I saw swastikas, which are not banned, written on the walls, on people's jackets. So there's a reason to be afraid. And we need to stand against these organizations that are trying to move aggressive forces closer to the border with Russia. We need to oppose NATO, say no to NATO. Some of us will be in Spain when there's a next anti-NATO meeting and an anti-NATO mobilization in June. And we hope to have anti-NATO demonstrations in the United States. Given the situation with Russia right now, it's extremely important that we come together and support those. And it's extremely important that we come together after today and continue working together to fight against NATO, to fight against the aggressive posture of the United States, and to make sure that we don't have war with Russia. I'm going to put two things in the chat when I get off right now. One is the webinar we're having tomorrow with people from Ukraine and Russia and the United States, anti-war activists, to have a discussion. The Ukrainians are not in Ukraine, because to speak out against war and to speak out against what the Ukrainian government is doing and to speak out against fascism, you could lose your life in Ukraine. The woman that organized our trip in 2019 had to leave before the trip because they put her on a fascist website, and people whose names appear there either die or disappear or go to jail, or they leave the country. And many Ukrainians have left the country because of this fear, which the U.S. and the coup that we supported is supporting. So let's oppose our government on this one. Let's show that there are Americans, U.S. people in the United States that are different than our government. Let's fight for peace. So I'll put in a link so you can register for the webinar tomorrow. Hundreds and hundreds have already registered. We'd love it to be big and we'd love it to be strong. And I'm also going to put in a link that the anti-Maidan Ukrainians that I met in Ukraine sent to me, which exposes a lot of the fascist movements in Ukraine. I'll put those two things in the chat. I hope you'll go to those, look at those, register for the webinar, and continue to fight against our government's war moves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe. And now I want to move to Cheryl Spencer. Cheryl is the co-chair of the Disarm and End Wars Committee of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, United States, also known as WILP. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for joining us today.
Good day from Cheryl Spencer. I am one of thousands of members of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, spread around the globe in 32 sections. WILF has been working against war since we were founded in 1915, 107 years ago. I deliver this message on behalf of the United States section of WILF, and in particular, our Disarm and End Wars Committee. To all who hear this, we ask you to consider this an earnest plea for peace in Ukraine and throughout the world. During a recent meeting of the UN Security Council discussing Ukraine, the ambassador from Kenya recounted a Swahili proverb. We found this saying to be particularly poignant. It is, "When the elephants fight, the grass suffers." Geopolitical rivalry during the Cold War led to suffering in the global south and all over Africa. So what suffers when the two transatlantic elephants of the US and Russia fight? WILF has always focused on the effects of war on women and children. We have a major Women, Peace and Security program which promotes feminist perspectives on peace and security. Let's first recognize the immediate suffering a war in Ukraine will cause to the estimated 290,000 women who will become pregnant this year in Ukraine. They will be significantly more likely to experience miscarriages or premature births. Their children will suffer too. The research is clear, war babies are more likely to grow up with severe health issues. Many of these babies will suffer from developmental delays, the effects of being born with toxic levels of stress hormones in the brain. Women and children in Ukraine will suffer. And for what reason will these almost 600,000 women and children be at risk? Well, contrary to the bellicose warmongering of both Russia and US, our WILF US committee recognizes that the central issue of this conflict is fossil fuel dependence. This entire conflict between Russia and the NATO alliance centers on access to important maritime ports, as well as pipelines in Europe and Ukraine that help distribute fossil fuels such as natural gas. We are appalled at the willingness of our respective governments to kill for the very fuels that lead to climate change. The other existential threat to life on Earth lurks in the thousands of nuclear weapons primed for use by the US and Russia. Some tactical nuclear weapons are stationed in NATO countries not far from Russia. A nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought, proclaim our leaders, old and new. But that is no assurance to WILF, and we worry that an invasion by Russia into Ukraine could lead to an exchange of nuclear missiles. But that doesn't worry investors in the manufacturers of missile components. We've seen their stock prices rise as talk of war increases. Our Disarm Committee, with the assistance of another major WILF program called Reaching Critical Will, is working on getting more countries to ratify the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This treaty is our best hope for avoiding a disastrous showdown between Russia and the US. We recognize that Russian journalists and cultural dissidents, such as the feminist collective Pussy Riot, have faced prison and feared assassination. While in the US, voter suppression threatens to further impose the tyranny of white supremacy. And drone assassinations kill innocent civilians and bystanders. And as the Kenyan ambassador noted recently, Africa and the global south will suffer when the so-called great global powers wage war. This is intolerable. Therefore, WILF US calls on the organizations participating in this online rally and your members who are out on the streets today to unite with all people seeking peace, freedom, and protections for the most vulnerable for an International Day of Peace demonstration. We are only demonstrating in the US today. We think we should organize an international demonstration on behalf of peace. We believe it is time to remind those elephants that the ground beneath them can change very quickly. To everyone who hears this message, we must unify and demand peace urgently, passionately, until we have been heard and the threat of suffering from war is extinct. Thank you. And I will be putting some links in the chat to some of those programs I have mentioned and to our YouTube channel. WILF has its own YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. And yes, we agree. An International Day of Action would be very important. And in fact, Canadian peace groups have expressed solidarity with the actions that we're doing in the United States around this weekend. People are asking about the link to the webinar tomorrow. It's at noon Eastern time on Sunday. It's organized by the United National Anti-War Coalition. And you can find that at unacpeace.org. Or you can also find it at popularresistance.org in the call to action at the top of the page. If you click on that and go to the bottom, there's also other webinars happening on Monday and Tuesday. So there's a lot of education out there for us. We have 2 more speakers, and then I'll make some brief closing remarks and show some photos from some of the rallies that have been happening. I appreciate everybody staying on for this rally today. So next I want to turn to Jerry Condon. And Jerry is a past president of the Veterans for Peace, and he's speaking today on behalf of the Nuclear Abolition Working Group. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you, Margaret. It's really wonderful to be here with you all and to see the anti-war movement coming together at this very important time. I am currently in San Diego, California, where the Veterans for Peace historic Golden Rule peace boat, anti-nuclear sailboat, just arrived yesterday. We are sailing for a nuclear-free world and a peaceful, sustainable future. I think the confrontation over Ukraine should be a wake-up call for everybody, because we really are facing the risk of a nuclear war. And not only that, but the basis for the conflict has very much to do with the nuclear weapons in Europe. The Veterans for Peace recently issued a nuclear posture review, our own nuclear posture review. I recommend that people check it out at veteransforpeace.org. It's a pretty comprehensive document. And among other things, it calls for the U.S. to resume its participation in the anti-ballistic missile treaty that was unilaterally abandoned by George W. Bush, and to resume its participation in the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was unilaterally abandoned by Donald Trump. These steps by those 2 presidents have made the situation in Europe even more dangerous and more unstable, and have a lot to do with the current crisis. I haven't seen any steps by the Obama administration or the Biden administration to restore their participation in these important treaties. I think it's very, very significant. Something happened yesterday that's very, very significant. Russia and China issued a joint statement, a very remarkable and important statement that I think that's important for us to hear. So I'm going to read that part of that statement now. This is from the Russian news agency TASS. Yesterday, Russia and China call on nuclear powers to abandon the Cold War mentality, reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their policies, and restrict the development of anti-ballistic missile defense systems, both countries said in a joint statement on Friday. Quote, "The sides welcome the joint statement of the leaders of the 5 nuclear weapon states on preventing nuclear war and avoiding arms races, and believe that all nuclear weapon states should abandon the Cold War mentality and zero-sum games, reduce the role of nuclear weapons in their national security policies, withdraw nuclear weapons deployed abroad, eliminate the unrestricted development of global anti-ballistic missile defense systems, ABM systems, and take effective steps to reduce the risks of nuclear war and any armed conflicts between countries with military nuclear capabilities." The statement goes on to say, "The sides believe that certain states military and political alliances and coalitions seek to obtain, directly or indirectly, unilateral military advantages to the detriment of the security of others, including by employing unfair competition practices, intensifying geopolitical rivalry, fueling antagonism and confrontation, and seriously undermining the international security order and global strategic stability. Russia and China oppose further enlargement of NATO and call on the North Atlantic Alliance to abandon its ideologized Cold War approaches, to respect the sovereignty, security, and interests of other states, the diversity of their civilizational, cultural, and historical backgrounds, and to exercise a fair and objective attitude towards the peaceful development of other states. This is a profound statement and a very reasonable statement. It's something that could have been written by Veterans for Peace or others of us here in the anti-war movement. I think it demands a reasonable, positive response from the United States government. And certainly, if that doesn't happen, it should be receive a very favorable and positive response from the U.S. peace movement. So I think it's we need to call on the U.S. government to abandon its policy of full spectrum dominance and replace it with a policy of full spectrum cooperation, as is called for in the Veterans for Peace Nuclear Posture Review. And the alternative is really too terrible to contemplate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerry. Our last but not least speaker is Lisa Savage, who's coming to us from her car. I'm guessing on her way to the rally there in Maine. And Lisa's with the Global Network Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. She calls herself the oldest social media manager. Thank you, Lisa, for taking time to join us.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you for everyone who organized today and has been organizing in your own areas. I loved that Rafiki said, you know, we need to organize, talk to not just the people that agree with us, but the people that are in our families, the people that are old friends, our coworkers, and really, you know, be helping to counteract the effect of this immense propaganda effort. I believe that propaganda effort started, you know, more than 4 years ago with demonizing Russia and the whole Russiagate nonsense. It was really priming the Democrats in particular to, you know, see Putin as a bad actor that had to be stopped. And I've been finding that opposing this war of the long list of wars that I've worked to oppose, I'm getting so much pushback in my inbox on social media from old friends that I grew up with about our anti-imperialist you know, analysis. People are just really pushing back on that. And they really, really want to say the farthest they'll go is, well, both sides, there are good people on both sides or bad people on both sides, and trying to make it sound like also Russia is responsible for this tension in Ukraine. I think some context is in order here. I really appreciate the you know, analysis that many of the speakers today have shared. But I also want to point to the fact that China and Russia just issued a joint statement on the occasion of the opening of the Olympics. And in it, I took time to read through it. It's long, it's detailed, but they expressed their respect for the United Nations. The word that was used was architecture. In other words, structure for, you know, resolving conflicts, for keeping the peace, and for addressing human rights issues. And they, you know, for instance, said that both parties to this agreement, China and Russia, you know, want to abide by the nuclear treaty, the anti-nuclear international treaty. As we know, Russia has renounced the first use of nuclear weapons, but the US has never done any such thing. So I think that's an important context. I think that the US imperialist project seems to be in trouble globally. And, you know, their posse NATO, they are in trouble, and they are feeling the fact that they're not going to be the big guy, the only guys on the block with the big stick anymore, and that's very threatening. On a domestic level, I think the context is that the Biden administration is in deep, serious trouble. We're approaching 900,000 deaths from COVID, and we still don't have universal health care or even a meaningful gesture in that direction. Inflation is galloping out of control at this point. So the people that were plunged into poverty by the pandemic are getting poorer by the second. And there's really been no meaningful progress on climate crisis either, or in the immigration crisis, or migrants at the border crisis. There just has been really, really little progress on meeting any of the promises that Joe Biden was elected on. He's been in office a year now. So I'd like to end by saying, I helped found an organization called the Maine Natural Guard, pointing out that, you know, it's the military driving climate crisis. And until we count those emissions and attend to that contributor, we're not even really talking about solving climate crisis. Can anyone imagine a worse crisis to our climate and our ability to live on the planet than a nuclear war? I certainly can't. I know that my grandchildren are worried about it. I know that my children are worried about it. And I really appreciate the heartfelt organizing and speaking out. I loved John was urging us to write letters to the editor and op-eds. I think that's so important. It's free. It's read by many, many people. And now my husband, Mark, and I are off to a rally in Topsom, Maine today to continue getting the word out at a big intersection where many people will be driving by that think Putin is a bad guy. And my target audience is that 9-year-old in the back seat opening their mouth to go, Mom, what are those people doing over there? So thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate the chance to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you to all of the organizations and speakers that participated in this rally today. Thank you to all of you who stuck with us until the end. We are being lied into another war. This is a very urgent situation. It's not the first time that we've been lied into a war. It won't be the last time, as you've heard, that we're going to be lied into a war. But we have a special responsibility as people who are aware of this to go out and tell the world we've got a very strong start with so many organizations coming together. We need to continue to build on that. And I think we can look to past anti-war movements and the effective actions that they took. I think of during the Vietnam War, when people literally went out in kayaks and canoes and blocked the naval ships. I think of during the US-backed Contra War to try to stop the Sandinista revolution in Nicaragua, people who put their bodies on the train tracks to stop the trains from bringing weapons in that were going to go to the Contras. Right now, the United States has just sent $200 million worth of weapons to the Nazis in Ukraine. Right now in Congress, there's a bill being fast-tracked by the Democrats. Pelosi and Schumer are both behind it. That would send another $500 million worth of lethal aid to Ukraine, as well as putting sanctions, economic sanctions on Russia, another form of war. So it's really important that we take actions to stop this, stop those airplanes, take our cue from the folks in the United Kingdom, Palestine Action, that are literally shutting down the weapons makers, the Israeli weapons makers. They've shut down one factory in Oldham, and now they're targeting another factory in Shenstone very effectively to shut it down. All of the organizations you heard from today have campaigns, are doing this work on a daily basis, targeting the bases, targeting the nuclear weapons, targeting the sanctions, all of the different aspects, the U.S. spending on the Pentagon that needs to be used for domestic needs. All of these groups have campaigns. I urge you to check them out and get involved. And I really urge you to attend the webinar tomorrow on Sunday at noon that's being organized by UNAC. There are going to be people from Ukraine and Russia there. I think it's really important we show the world a strong showing that people in the United States are not in lockstep with the government. We do not agree with what the United States government is doing. We do not want another war. We can see through their lies. We're going to call out their lies. We're going to stand in solidarity with our people around the world and say no to the foreign bases, no to NATO, no to more wars. We want cooperation, as you've heard. We want solidarity and international cooperation to address the many crises that we're facing. So I'm going to go out with a few photos from some of the actions that have taken place so far, and I urge you, to check out at popularresistance.org. Check out. Oh, maybe I will if it will let me advance it. We'll see. I'll have to go back. Hold on one second. Go to popularresistance.org and go to the slider. And what you'll see there is information about the upcoming actions. And let's see, slideshow. That works. I do want to show you these pictures. Here we go. If it'll come up. There we go. Ah. All right, maybe I can't show you the pictures. I'm not that tech savvy. I apologize. But anyway, thank you so much, everyone. Go to popularresistance.org, go to the call to action, and sign the petition, join the actions, and we'll see you in the streets, and we'll see you on remaining webinars. Take care, everybody. And I will try to get the chat out to folks, and this is being recorded on Facebook Live if you want to follow up and see it. So have a great afternoon, everybody. And go out there and get them. Thank you.